So the other day I released a video on romantic type pairings, and I think those of you who watched it would agree I could do with making a second video. A kind of key, if you will, in order to fully explain the code I used and the terminology coinciding with it. But I was also reminded just how, well, let's say, curious people are to see how cognitive function theory applies to, for example, their own relationships. To what extent does it explain the romantic dynamic between one person and another, and to what extent does it not? And while I personally do not believe cognitive type has a kind of intrinsic value pertaining to romantic compatibility, I have, however, noticed certain cognitive type pairings tend to have a higher probability of meeting certain romantic prerequisites. But as I've alluded to previously in both episodes in my Romance and Type series, it is still possible to have all of those essential prerequisites without necessarily being one of the more probable type combinations. But you know, the interactions beneath that video just got my brain working a bit, and I thought it'd be an interesting idea for this Thursday's video just to introduce the concept of dating and type. And along a similar vein to last Thursday's video, which looked at personality typing if it was accepted as a global norm, and indeed in some ways directly following on from the future tense orientation of that particular video, I thought it might be cool for this video to just explore the potential ramifications of, let's say, two different scenarios. The first scenario is a very simple one, to be honest, and I think it's already begun to some extent. And this is the idea of using the type code you identify with in order to not only aid your own romantic choices, but also present the code to other people on a dating website or otherwise, to inform their choice as well. And to be entirely honest, I think this first scenario is just going to be a cute way to apply a type code a person has received from an online test. And you know how these things go. On an intuitive level, people tend to look for like-minded others. They tend to go for the affinity score over everything else. And in this rather quaint application of one's type code, I suspect the most common interaction would be, you're an INFJ, oh my god, I'm an INFJ too, let's hook up. And then that kind of strange realization that everybody else is typing as an INFJ. Followed by the explanation, oh okay, so only INFJs tend to gravitate towards this particular application of type code. Only INFJs gravitate towards online tests, that's why there's so many of us. But other than becoming a simple INFJ watering hole, I don't actually believe this application would be as bad as it might seem. I mean, fair enough, people who already know the type, who are studied in the cognitive functions, would become pretty infuriated that most people here are mistyped. And that means if they really are looking to find a certain type, there is a pretty good chance that the person you find isn't going to be the type you're looking for after all. However, if this dating app in question was populated only by people who have just done a test and not necessarily looked any further into the cognitive functions, I don't actually think this would be too bad. I mean, I think it's fair to say the people who are actually using this app are going to be those people who like to write a bit in a profile, who for better or worse are doing a little bit more than the whole swiping thing. Well, to be honest, this won't actually be a personality typing website. I don't actually think this dating application would be particularly groundbreaking. I mean, if all it comprises is going onto the app, filling in a test, and then being assigned a type code based upon the answers you gave, well, this is just a variation on a concept of compatibility score. All it means in essence is you answered this to certain questions, and you gave similar answers to another person. And that means within this particular instance, it might even be preferable to go for someone of the same type. Because first of all, there's a small chance the person's actually the same type as you. And secondly, if they gave similar answers to you on the test, which is again just a general affinity test in a different kind of wrapping, then yeah, you might have a lot in common. And maybe if it was, say, an ENFP with an ENTP here, you'll have very similar perception and outlook on life, while maybe just disagreeing on enough in order to spark a bit more natural conversational flow. Other than, wow, I agree, let me tell you something else I know you'll agree with 100% as well. So I'd love to know what you think about this first scenario, the idea of a dating app whereby you kind of do a personality test before, having your profile activated, and you are henceforth assigned a type code based upon the answers you gave within that particular test. I mean, you can still say it's a kind of type. It's a useful way to communicate different styles, for example, of affinity. And maybe such an app will also recommend different kinds of type pairings. I mean, the type pairings wouldn't be able to be based off cognitive function psychology. I do not believe the app will be able to construct a questionnaire that can give people their accurate cognitive type. But if the app actually matched different, let's call them affinity profiles together, say pairing a more extroverted disposition with a more introverted one, through recommendations or the like, I think that would be a pretty cool experiment. I do not believe it'll actually be cognitive type pairing, but you could say it's a form of personality type, even if that personality type will likely vary across a person's lifetime. And as somebody commented on last Thursday's video, I think this would actually be a great place to collect information. Even if it isn't strictly cognitive type based, just knowing that people who answer certain things on a certain questionnaire and subsequently receive a series of letters in order to represent their answers more commonly successfully hook up with certain other types. Type, quote unquote. That alone would be pretty cool information. As usual, I'd love to know what you think on that matter. Do you think such an app would be able to accurately type a person? Because the concept of accurate typing is what I'm now going to explore, and I'm going to revisit the future dystopia, if you like, that I presented in the Personality Type Society video I uploaded last Thursday, in order to present a scenario in which type is something much more infallible. Okay, so within this scenario, it's no longer a dainty little 16 personality types inspired dating app, but rather a trend which is now pervasive across all possible dating applications, including those in real life. What's your favourite food? Are you a cat or a dog person? What's your personality type? Aside from those people who would prefer not to ask the question, and who would themselves withhold their type from another person, in order to make it more natural, of which I think there will be many, by the way, there will be a general trend of using type in order to inform one's own romantic undertakings, and indeed romantic commitments. And it is this scenario that I'm worried about. But as with the first video, I personally believe, and tell me what you think of this too, that those very initial negative consequences will be short-lived. I mean, people can learn from their mistakes, and there will already be extensive research into this field, into what types will naturally get on more with each other anyway, and what types might actually be a less intuitive but more effective combination for long-term compatibility. So really, as bleak as it might seem at the onset, with everybody going after their own type because apparently affinity is the most important thing in a relationship, because obviously the best relationship is two people who are exactly the same as each other. But no, even if people do choose to ignore the existing literature and just decide a same-type pairing is optimal, or let's say people do read the research and then choose the most optimal one for long-term success, even if it is not necessarily the most natural and intuitive one. Well, let's say there's two different types of people here, and I think each of these groups are equally bad in their own way. There's group one who would look at the data for the most optimal relationship, and then, because people love boxes, fixate on that particular type pairing, ignore all other opportunities that come their way, and let's say in worst case scenario, assume just because it is optimal it's going to be easy, when it is quite likely that the scientific recommendation pertained more to a type which was less intuitive, and therefore a little bit harder, requiring more work. Well, if this individual is pursuing that relationship and finally finds the person they're looking for, and then isn't willing to put in the additional work the scientific literature recommended, well, that's a worst of both worlds scenario. But then you have group two. They sort of want to do their own thing, but they're still using personality type on an everyday basis. They want to approach dating in a more natural level. Heck, let's say for the sake of argument, they are generally, as a general demographic, younger, pursuing dating for the excitement and also to learn new things about themselves, acquire new experiences. And perhaps less interested than the first group might be in settling down, for example, and thus not necessarily pursuing a long-term relationship. Well, in some cases you'll have people trying every single type pairing, but owing to that particular mentality, never giving a relationship its full due, never giving it a proper chance, never truly committing, and thus never really experiencing the type pairings in the first place. And then you have the other subdivision within here that, for whatever reason, is very set on their own particular choice. Maybe in some cases it'll be the same type as their first infatuation. But let's be honest, it could be for a whole host of reasons. Well, these people are still going after one type, and they're not necessarily that open to other opportunities that come their way, should that opportunity not meet their specified prerequisites. Well, I'd say this subdivision here is going to have a very similar situation to Group A. But there's also that potential third group I alluded to earlier. Those people who completely hold back on any employment of personality type in their romantic pursuits until they actually have a relationship established. And only then perhaps do the people in question decide to share their personality types. using that information not to inform their own romantic choices, but rather to help the people to overcome the various trials and tribulations that coincide with a longer-term relationship. And I actually like this idea quite a lot. Perhaps dating and such should be much more natural and intuitive. Perhaps that is a healthier approach. Healthier for acquiring positive experience, and helpful for stoking that initial fiery passion, which is oftentimes useful for cementing that long-term bond. Because I've got to admit, personally, I'm not a huge fan of the concept of using personality type in order to inform one's romantic decisions. At least not in the initial onset of any given relationship. I mean, I see the advantages, and I'd love to know your opinion on this down below in the comments. But for me, I personally find those advantages to be weighed down by the disadvantages. But I don't know, call me an idealist, call me an old-fashioned romantic, but personally I find such a clinical approach might really take away the fun, take away the excitement, and generally take away the intrigue. At least in the early stages of a relationship, particularly in the dating process. You probably don't want the person you're dating to be too predictable. And it's nice to have a bit of room for surprises. I mean, maybe for people who are really looking to settle down, looking to find that single partner they're going to spend potentially the rest of their life with, such a clinical application of personality type might actually be a very good idea. But for those people not necessarily at that stage yet, for whatever reason, it might be better to err on the side of caution. I mean, there's probably a lot to talk about in that particular topic, and I'd absolutely love to know your thoughts on this matter down below. But right now I'm noticing a bit of a sore throat from filming a type comparison earlier, and so I do hope that was a sufficiently in-depth exploration of the topic in question. And before I leave you, I've got to say I really loved the discussion that was going on in last Thursday's video. There were just so many great viewpoints, and I loved the variety as well. Some people had one view, other people had a completely different view, but it was all incredibly positive and mutually beneficial discussion. And to be honest, just as with today's video, I didn't believe there was a absolute right answer to the scenario in question. But all of the feedback under the video is just so well thought out. And if indeed there is a correct answer, it's probably a strange amalgamation of all of the different answers in that comment section. So as usual, I'd absolutely love to know your thoughts on this matter down below. Thank you for watching the video, especially if you made it this far, you are awesome. If you enjoyed it, be sure to let me know by hitting that like button. And be sure to click that subscribe button down below with the bell icon next to it if you haven't already. If you're interested in the fundamentals of CPT, I highly recommend checking out the CPT ebook. And if you are uncertain about your type or would just like more information about how it individually applies to you, I highly recommend checking out the CPT type service as well. And CPT is also on Patreon, so if you're interested in supporting the channel on an additional level, that'd be massively, massively appreciated. But of course, it goes without saying, I really appreciate your feedback, interaction, and support over this medium as well. So as usual, thank you for watching the video, and I'll be back on Sunday. For now, take care.